Today's episode of the Gone Fission Nuclear Report is brought to you by Fluor. We're building a better world. Welcome to the Gone Fission Nuclear Report, your one-stop source for all the latest news from the Department of Energy's Environmental Management Program. Now, here's your host, Michael Butler.
Hello, and welcome to the Gone Fission Nuclear Report. Today is Monday, January 23rd, 2023. We're covering all the news from the Department of Energy's Environmental Management Program across the country. We thank our friends at Fluor for being presenting sponsor for today's episode. Since the end of the Cold War in the early 1990s, community reuse organizations have played an important role in helping DOE communities replace the jobs lost due to closure or downsizing of nuclear production facilities. These community groups have supported private sector job creation, helped DOE dispose of excess equipment, and served as a unified community voice when it comes to local concerns and potential new site missions. The longest serving CRO director in the complex retired at the end of last year. He is Rick McLeod, president and CEO of the Savannah River Site Community Reuse Organization. Rick held the post for 15 years, nearly half of the CRO's existence. Since he took the job in 2008, Rick has worked with the site and the community in 2 states to make sure community interests are addressed. The SRS CRO covers 5 counties in Georgia and South Carolina. In today's episode, we talked to Rick about his 15 years at the helm of this community group, including the challenges he has faced and what he would tell his successor.
CROs have been involved in workforce mainly from looking at workforce transition, the workforce being reduced. We're seeing a lot of effort now in workforce recruitment, retention, quality of life, being attracted to the different communities. I think the CROs have a role in that position. We're seeing a lot of the consent-based siting back on the agenda. We see new nuclear, small modular reactors to micro reactors. I think there's a role for CROs to be involved in there, whether it's demo sites to actually recruit land or permit the land through the CRO for demonstration projects. So I think there's a lot for the CROs to do. It'd be nice if DOE would investigate the funding issue with them. Do some of them need to be restarted? I was on a call earlier with the Carlsbad, the WIP folks. They had one initially, went away, and they're contemplating would like to start a CRO. There is, as far as I know, in my little limited time of experience, there's not a really office at DOE that manages any of the community reuse organizations. There's not a role and responsibility person. It really boils down to the site level as far as I can concern. You may need some concurrences at the upper levels, but there is no one entity. Like legacy management back in the day was the one that actually was involved heavily with the CROs. They're not so much anymore. So the CROs are kind of on their own right now, so to speak.
We'll hear more from Rick McLeod later in the podcast. We'll be right back with today's headlines right after this from Fluor. The Department of Energy has taken an important first step toward fulfilling its 2020 agreement to remove plutonium from the state of South Carolina. NNSA and Environmental Management completed the first shipment of downblended surplus plutonium from the Savannah River site. The shipment headed out to the waste isolation pilot plant in New Mexico. This is a milestone as it marks the first shipment to include defense transuranium or true waste from NNSA's surplus plutonium disposition program. Plutonium is diluted or downblended at SRS into a proliferation-resistant form that cannot be used in nuclear weapons. This allows it to be shipped and disposed of at the New Mexico facility. Work is underway at SRS to increase the pace of downblending, which would speed removal of plutonium from the state. In 2021, DOE paid the state $650 million as settlement for its failure to remove the plutonium on an agreed-upon schedule. Construction of a new wastewater retention basin on the Hanford site is complete, thanks to the help of a local small business contractor. Elite Construction and Development, a Richland-based small business, completed Basin 41 at the Liquid Effluent Retention Facility. The 8 million gallon retention basin will provide additional storage capacity needed to support the significant quantity of waste anticipated with operation of the Hanford Waste Treatment and Immobilization Plant. And finally, here's a fun story connected to the winter weather that's challenging ongoing work at DOE facilities. The Hanford site is looking for creative names for its fleet of snowplows. The idea was sparked by a Name the Snowplow contest in Ohio that drew entries like Cleopatra and Control Salt Delete. A recent DOE post on Facebook and Twitter read, "Well, we've got plows and they don't have names. Can you fix that? Give it your best shot. We'd love your suggestions." Suggested names so far include Plowabunga, Snowhattan Project, Fast and Furious, Weird Plow Yankovic, Blizzard Buster, and Betty Whiteout. We'll be back with this week's Spotlight interview right after this from Fluor. Rick McLeod is the longest serving director of a community reuse organization in the DOE complex. Rick retired at the end of last year. As president and CEO of the Savannah River Site Community Reuse Organization, a post he has held since 2008. Rick headed the organization for half of its 30-year existence. Today, we talked to Rick about his tenure in one of the most active CROs in the country and one of only a couple that covers 2 states. Welcome, Rick. Glad to have you on the podcast.
Spike, good to see you. Hope you had a good holidays and sound like you're back in the saddle moving forward here on the 2023 with Gone Fission.
Yes, sir. We're well underway on season 3, and we're very happy to have you as a guest on the podcast. Rick, you and I have known each other a long time in the interest of full disclosure, and we're friends. And I want to talk to you about your career with the CRO and kind of what some of the accomplishments have been, so your view of how CROs are operating within the DOE complex and the kind of achievements and the challenges that they face and the working with the DOE, working with the communities. Let's start back at the beginning. Before you headed the CRO, you were an official with a nonprofit in the Aiken area, and you were also the technical advisor for the Citizens Advisory Board. So you were involved in the Savannah River Site issues before you came in. I'm wondering, what was your impression or your perspective on the CRO before you became the president and CEO? How did you view the CRO? What did you know about it? And how did that change after you got involved as president?
Mike, I didn't know too much about it. I knew it existed. I'd also had a consulting career span a little bit with what was NUS, which was the DOE contractor there a number of years. We had over 200 people in the Aiken office at that time. So I knew the CRO existed, but didn't really know what it did. Saw the ad or somehow got contacted and decided to apply. And since I did have a little bit of the knowledge from the cab and knew about the site and future direction, if you remember, that's back when the MOX was starting up and new missions and things of that sort. So I decided to give it a whirl. The nonprofit I worked with was the National Wild Turkey Federation, and they were going through some management changes too. So it made a good decision on my part to go ahead and make a job change.
Well, the CRO has accomplished a lot under your leadership over the last nearly 15 years. And I'm wondering what stands out in your mind. What are the highlights? What do you feel like the major achievements that the CRO has had over that time period?
Going back a little bit to when I came on board, you may remember the CRO started with funding from DOE. In 2008, all that funding was gone. The CROs, in our case, used the money to help start up businesses. So one of the first things coming in was trying to clean the books. We had a lot of businesses that didn't quite make it as far as continuation and having a revenue stream to be in business. So we had to go through almost like a collection agency time period, and then actually had to dissolve some of those businesses to move forward. And we'll touch base probably a little bit later, but that allowed us, some of the business were very successful, and we were able to get some investments to help the CRO in the financial condition that it currently is in.
Well,
but to answer,
yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, but to answer your question, it's not one thing, but really a whole series of things. Just mentioned the investments were a big part of it. When I came in 2008, we were slightly over 2 million in our total investment portfolio. We're close to 7 million today. So that's been a major accomplishment. I have a saying that if you don't make a profit, you're not going to be a nonprofit for too long. So you do have to make some revenue stream to keep the doors open and running. I think another key is the engaged board. When I came on board to the CRO, our volunteer board was very much engaged, very knowledgeable. One of the first efforts, and I think you were actually in full disclosure involved in that, was a press conference at the National Press Club. And we did that on Yucca Mountain. If you remember, that was that time frame where we were fighting hard to keep Yucca Mountain open and running. But the board was very much engaged. They were involved in that whole press conference as well. A key, Mike, has been, and it's no small feat, but having a staff that cares, having a staff that's passionate. Kind of hand selected some of the staff, but having the CRO staff that we have, all have been on board for over 5 years, has been made a great accomplishments for the CRO. Great strides. Two things I will point out is our grants that we got from DOE. You don't hear the story too often, but the scholarships that those grants offer, it kind of really tugs at your heart when you hear some of the people discuss how those scholarships help them stay in school and get a job. So we have done, I think last count, thousands of scholarships. So we don't get much credit for that as an organization, but we have done a lot as far as training and scholarships, helping out the local colleges and universities. Another one that we kind of took the lead on is the high-level waste. Clarification on the definition of high-level waste. We started that project pretty heavily. Actually went to WILP and met with the Carlsbad folks about taking some of the waste from Savannah Riverside, that by chemical composition is not really high-level waste. But because of where it came from, the old definition, was high-level waste, could only go to a deep repository, a geologic repository. There is currently over 2,000 glass canisters at Savannah Riverside that actually are not high-level waste because of their chemical composition. So DOE has actually started reevaluating waste streams based upon that composition and not just the origin of the waste. That has a lot of potential across the complex to save tremendous cleanup dollars, not just at Savannah Riverside, Hanford, and other locations.
Well, a lot of your accomplishments have been directly related to some key nuclear and Department of Energy issues. And the CRO under your leadership has been the voice of the community, and you in particular have stood out on a national basis as a voice for CROs in general and community organizations across the DOE complex. I'm wondering, how would you characterize your CRO's relationship with the Department of Energy? They were the startup force behind creation of the CROs, but you later kind of evolved into an independent organization. How is your relationship with DOE, and do you feel like it's been working as a partnership?
I truly do. I think going back to the grants, back when Inez Trier was headed DOE, we did an unsolicited proposal to start off that whole grant program. We get a lot of calls from across the nation wanting to know, what grant application did we put in, but it was actually a true partnership back to DOE that saw a need for workforce grants. So that's one example. Another example, when I came on board, if you remember, we used to actually have to bribe folks to come to our meetings with a lunch buffet. So we kind of did away with that after a number of years, and we actually started getting a lot of DOE interest in our meetings, contractor interest in our meetings. They would come basically to the executive committee and to our full board meetings. So I think that shows a little bit of partnership at the local level. We also had started some, we call it Breakfast with Budney. He's the current site manager. So that's a carryover from other types of meetings that we've had. So we continue to have those types of meetings. So it's been a true partnership, both at the DOE level, but also we're getting more and more folks on the staffer level from congressional folks. We actually have Senator Scott Staffer drives up from Charleston to attend our meetings. So, the congressional staffers also is a partnership there. They see the benefit of the CRO. I think you actually helped with me on a congressional subcommittee testimony that we did. And then another example of how we are at least made a name, or at least folks are willing to listen to us. Although I'm not sure if Congress listens, but at least we gave them our talking points anyway.
Well, your CRO is one of only a couple in the DOE complex that covers 2 states. Most are involved with only the state where the site is located, but you stretch across South Carolina and Georgia. Can you talk a little bit about the challenges of having 2 states and where there may be rivalries with regard to economic development, and how do you balance the interests of having 2 states involved in your organization?
Balance is exactly what we did, and we also made it so that all the funds that were given out for economic development are balanced across all 5 counties. We actually track that. We try to balance it. If one is maybe off a little, it may be because they didn't request the funds. But we do a 5-year rotating determination on programs, projects that the CRO wants to fund. We actually use 80% of all the proceeds from our property sales goes back into the 5-county area and divided up by each county. So it is a little difficult. Some counties are more rural in nature, some are more urban in nature. Each one is a little unique in their makeup. So we try to identify the needs specific to each county. Initially, there was a little push and pull, but so far we have actually done away with some of that rivalry, and most folks are, I think, happy with what we've done. For a person nonprofit in the local community, we have almost given out $7 million in my time period there to the local community. So that's 5 counties. It is a little difficult to juggle 22 bosses. So I have 11 from Georgia and 11 from South Carolina. So that makes it a little interesting. But again, they're a volunteer board. They're very engaged. But again, they have day jobs as well. So that's a little different for folks to understand.
Well, just to let our listeners and viewers know about the 5 counties that you mentioned, 3 of those counties are in South Carolina, and they're Aiken, Allendale, and Barnwell counties, and 2 are in Georgia, Richmond County, where Augusta is located, and Columbia County, correct?
And they were set up way before I came involved, mainly because of the reduction in workforce, the workforce transition when CROs were formed. As you well know, the site had almost 26,000 people back in the early 90s when they did away with the K-reactor restart program. That's when we saw a lot of workforce transition, and that's when the CROs were formed. And as you know, our organization actually started out as a 2-state organization to help with economic development, and was later named the Community Reuse Organization. So we were formed in 93 as a nonprofit, and in 96 we got designated by the Savannah River site as the CRO for the Savannah River site.
Rick, there's been an announcement that the National Nuclear Security Administration, NNSA, will become the landlord, the new landlord for the Savannah River site, taking over from environmental management. I'm wondering what you think about that change overall. Do you think it will be good for the Savannah River site? And just as importantly, will it be good for the community?
The CRO used to do a lot of white papers. I think you may have prepared 1 or 2 back in your days. This was one of them. We had anticipated a landlord change, wanted a landlord change. This was basically the time period when we're looking at energy parks, and EM kind of is really more interested in closing up, cleaning up sites as opposed to longevity and long-term missions. The CRO recognized we need to do something. NNSA had a presence here. We actually recommended in the white paper that they become the landlord. Then a little later on, we also said if they were not the landlord, we'd love to see a nuclear materials program office be formed at DOE. That way it could help with some of the Yucca Mountain, some of the legacy waste that we have at the site that needs to go off-site for disposal, not just cleanup. So we have been advocate for a new landlords, mainly because of future missions. NSA is not necessarily used to working with CROs. They believe there's a meeting coming up with our Up and Atom Citizens for Nuclear Technology Awareness, and Frank Rose from NNSA and Ike White will be attending that meeting, and that's one of the main topics is the transition from landlord from EM to NNSA. So, it's just going to depend upon how NNSA embraces this, embrace the local community. I think it will take a lot of board engagement and involvement, probably more so than they have been the last several, 5 years or so, because it will be a change. And they may end up having to advocate a little bit within DOE at the NNSA level to understand what the CRO can do for them and how they can benefit the CROs.
Well, that CNTA Up and Atom meeting should be very interesting. You're going to have the two key leaders from both organizations there, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of community interest in that meeting, and probably be some news made there that day. So that'll be an interesting one to follow.
I've been told, Mike, that it's sold out. So
Is that
if you
right?
if you're planning on coming down, you may be too late, or you need to kick somebody out of a seat. But I've been told it's sold out.
Well, I'm glad they're having a good response to it. That's great. What do you see as the future of CROs and the DOE complex? These organizations were initially created in the 90s to work with the Department of Energy and the communities in the downsizing of the nuclear facilities, as we've discussed. But their goal was really to address diversification, to try to have less dependence on federal jobs and more dependence on the private sector. Is there still a need for CROs in the future?
I think so, and maybe more so in the future than they were in the past. CROs have been involved in workforce mainly from looking at the workforce transition, the workforce being reduced. We're seeing a lot of effort now in workforce recruitment, retention, quality of life, being attracted to the different communities. I think the CROs have a role in that position. We're seeing a lot of the consent-based siting back on the agenda. We see new nuclear, small modular reactors to micro reactors. I think there's a role for CROs to be involved in there, whether it's demo sites to actually recruit land or permit the land through the CRO for demonstration projects. So I think there's a lot for the CROs to do. It'd be nice if DOE would investigate the funding issue with them. Do some of them need to be restarted? I was on a call earlier with the Carlsbad, the WIP folks. They had one initially, went away, and they're contemplating would like to start a CRO. There is, as far as I know, in little limited time of experience, there's not a really office at DOE that manages any of the community reuse organizations. There's not a role and responsibility person. It really boils down to the site level as far as I can concern. You may need some concurrences at the upper levels, but there is no one entity like legacy management back in the day was the one that actually was involved heavily with the CROs. They're not so much anymore. So the CROs are kind of on their own right now, so to speak.
Well, the CROs and SRS CRO in particular have played a key role in the community over the past 30 years now, and you've been very important in dealing with the issues that have come up, cleanup issues and other things, the nuclear waste disposal, plutonium disposition, a lot of other things that have impacted the site and the community. And you've also been a very effective voice for the community. I think the congressional leaders have indicated at different times that they like the idea of having one group come up to represent the community rather than a lot of different folks with different agendas meeting with them over time. And so you've been able to unify that and speak with a single voice, which has also been helpful. I'm wondering on a personal level, Rick, what's next for you? Your retirement was effective at the end of the year. You've obviously still got a lot of knowledge and experience and passion. I just wonder what you're planning on doing next.
Nothing for the short term. I am on retainer for the CRO to help them during the transition period, but currently no immediate plans. I think one of the bigger things as all of us age, at least on the nuclear side, is what do we do with this institutional knowledge that we all have? How do we give that to the new folks, or how do we share that? So I'll come waiting to see what happens. Maybe after a little things settle down, we'll see if there's other opportunities. It would be nice to be able to work when you want to work and work on what you want to work on. So I'm hoping that may be in the future, but we will see. But currently, right now, nothing really immediately. So we'll see.
Well, that gives you a chance to enjoy retirement, at least for a short time till you move into the next thing. I don't see you sitting idly by for very long. Rick, we've talked about a lot of things in the last few minutes. I'm wondering if there's anything else that I haven't asked you or that we haven't covered that you'd like to say before we go today.
Well, during the transition period, I hope whoever they hire in as a successor understands the history of the CROs, not just the SRS CRO. But I believe that's one of those institutional knowledge that's kind of going to the wayside. I'm hoping whoever comes in picks that up. I think it's a key to the future is also understanding the past and the history there. So I hope they end up doing that. I think they also have to understand, like we said, 22 board members. Even though they're engaged from time to time, it wanes a little from time to time. They are volunteer. They all have day jobs. So I think whoever comes in is going to have to chart their own course, not the one I charted or the one that was charted before me, but decide what they see the CRO's future is going to be and almost do their own work and their own background, not necessarily depending upon the board to chart that, but they have to do it themselves.
So they'll need a vision.
They will need a vision. The board can help with the vision, but they may need the board to help see that vision too. And then, of course, somebody has to implement that vision. So that will fall within the successor too.
Well, Rick, I really appreciate you being with us today. Thank you for your insights and information, looking back at your time with the CRO, which has been a very, very successful period. You've meant a lot to the organization and to the people of your 5-county area in Georgia and South Carolina. And I wish you all the best in the future.
Appreciate it. I had a granddaughter New Year's Eve. So my daughter was born Christmas Eve. So a Christmas Eve daughter had a New Year's Eve granddaughter. So that's kind of interesting to go by. So with them in Chicago, I may be using up a lot of United Airlines seats. So,
well, it sounds like a good use. And the only thing you can say to that is life is good.
Yes, it is.
Thank you very much, Rick.
Thank you, Mike. Talk to you later.
All right. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Today's episode of the Gone Fission Nuclear Report is brought to you by Fluor. We're building a better world.